We have Elliot, whose pronouns are he, him, and he wants to discuss the reproducibility. I'm guessing of some of these topics in social sciences. So, Elliot, yeah, thanks for calling. Why don't you give us a quick rundown of what you want to talk about?
Yeah, thanks so much, y'all. It's been a great episode so far. And I figured since we're talking about pseudoscience, I'd ask about this. I've heard a lot of,
Mhm.
you know, smart people or maybe pseudo smart people. We'll figure that out. But they've said, oh, psychology and sociology, we those studies can't be reproduced. We don't have any evidence of that. And I was just kind of wondering, how true is that? How much of the modern practice of psychology and psychiatry is actually based on reproducible science?
I mean, I would say that the good stuff is all based on reproducible science. Now, I recognize that psychology is not calculus, right? Like it is very much a soft science. It is a science. It is a science. It has been under development through the scientific method in some form or fashion. I mean, you can draw the line wherever you choose to, but I think 1900, like 1899, Joseph Brewer and Freud starting to publish case studies, like I might draw the line there. And I will say that in all of the history since, we have increasingly gotten better at being able to identify specific psychological constructs, developing valid and reliable measures of those constructs, and then just sort of like flicking things, intervening, like fucking around with complex systems, and then seeing if our measures of those constructs go up or down. We like the therapeutic modality that I kind of lean into and rely on the most. I saw recently that there have been 17,000 different research studies published in around that therapeutic modality in the last 10 years. And each one of those studies, give or take, is effectively like measuring and verifying and validating its results against the other 17,000. So to suggest that nothing in the social sciences could be like measured or validated or replicated is very much out of step. Is it a soft science? Sure. People are soft. People are messy. Anytime you try and measure a person, you're going to have a real challenge on your hands. But that doesn't mean we're just making it up as we go. Does all of that feel true to you too?
Yeah, I'm curious what
Oh,
Elliot's response is to that.
no, I'm going to try to be a good skeptic and I'm going to go do my own research, as best I can. But I think what you were pointing out is exactly some of the stuff that I've already kind of looked at, where it seems those people that are saying, this is more in the line of us just making it up as we go along. Those people are just a little bit behind the studies, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I should say that, I mean, we have been publishing like wide scale research for a long time. Uh, you know, Early on, Freud and Jung and some of these earlier folks were very reliant on case studies. And for a long time, most, if not all, psychological research was like self research and, less effective in a lot of ways. But once you get into the 50s and you start talking about B.F. Skinner and Watson, and I could go on and on, we start to work through that data problem. And it's taken a long time, but by the time you get to the 80s and 90s and you start seeing things like cognitive behavioral therapy show up and some of these other things, like we have endless amounts of data on those topics. Now, none of these therapies are perfect. People are squishy. People are difficult to measure. All of that is still super true. I recognize that there is a softness to my science that you wouldn't see in many, many other fields. But, we're figuring it out. We're getting there and we're getting results because ultimately that's the thing that matters. Like, okay, we've decided that this is a construct and we've decided we can measure this construct and we've decided blah, blah, fucking blah. None of that actually matters if people's lives aren't getting better. And we can say qualitatively, overwhelmingly that there are therapeutic practices that make lives better. And that can be documented by talking to any of the people in your life who have gone through therapy, but also through looking at like peer-reviewed, widely published research.
I think what's tricky with that is
Thank-
we can get data sets that are large, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that particular modality will work for you, even if you have a similar problem.
Sure.
The same way that if you have, you know, I don't know, an issue with your cholesterol, right? Your doctor is going to take measurements, might prescribe a medication, and then there's going to be follow-ups, and your doctor is going to say, do you have weird side effects? Is this actually working? And take more measurements to make sure that drug that is, you know, approved for a specific purpose actually does work for you, and that they've accurately diagnosed, you know, the problem, a support, and will follow up with you. So I love this question. I think we need more research in psychotherapy. We should constantly be improving as a field. And yet I think there's also enough at this point to say, like, hey, try therapy.
Well, I wanted to
That's
just
awesome.
throw out
Yeah,
there. Oh no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I really, really appreciate all three of you, and thanks so much for answering.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you for calling. This is a really good question. And I know that I am by far not the resident expert on any of these things, but I do want to say, like, when it comes to research and it comes to whether or not we can verify these things, a lot of what we talk about in terms of psychology and the human experience, it's just anecdotal, right? And so that can seem like something that's easy to dismiss. But that's why, like Christy was saying, once you start gathering enough anecdotal evidence, we can start to see trends and we can start to see, like, well, does this work for most people or does this work? That's why Christy earlier was saying there is no evidence that conversion therapy works, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, it's more damaging. It causes more damage. Well, we
Sure.
have enough anecdotal evidence and we have enough before, after, you know, and people's experiences to be able to say things like, overall, this is more helpful or overall, this is less helpful. And so it's not a solid measurement like pounds or ounces or inches or miles, you know, and I know we like those cold hard numbers in terms of data, but there's a lot to be said about people's experiences and what they can say over the course of thousands of people or the course of decades, you know, whether or not something works.
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope that puts some of the rumors to rest, Elliott. Again, I'm going to acknowledge that, like, it's a very crude instrument, something like the Beck Depression Inventory, for instance. When we're trying to measure somebody's level of depression, we're asking them questions about themselves, which is a very good way to get very not great data. But when you do that a couple of 100,000 times, you start to recognize that the Beck Depression Inventory is actually like very reliable. And so we, you know, kind of take that to mean valid in some very complex ways. But yes, we have good research on these things, and it's worth maybe poking around some of that research just to know that it exists.
Yeah, thank you all
Awesome.
so much. Real quick before I get out of your hair, ink blots. How true are they? Come on, really.
Thank you for asking. And I'm going to let you go all the answers. So thank you so much for calling. But
Thanks
yeah,
so much.
Emily and Christy, ink blots.
I mean, I find it kind of a fun thing to kick around. I mean, projective tests like that have never been super accurate, and that is okay because nobody really uses them anymore, but never was really in wide scale usage anyway. So often folks will see a serial killer being interviewed on a movie or something, and they'll bust out something like that. And it's important to remember that the particular tools to measure the particular things that we're looking for in some of those situations, a lot of these tests were developed and designed for very specific populations who are struggling with like homicidal rage, or, you know, people who had committed like mass murder. We developed a lot of tests around folks like that for people like that. So for people like that, they had some amount of verifiability, some amount of validity and reliability, but the ink blot is not really a thing anymore. There's like a handful of folks that are still trained and that still utilize it, but no, it's donezo. We've got better science now. Does that all feel accurate to you, Emily?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was only covered briefly in one of my classes, right? As sort of a historical piece. I think what's interesting about it is that it was developed around this idea of a norm. So the ink blot really is like people who fit this idea of norm that psychology had at the time tend to see specific things in it. And then the test was sort of like, well, do you see kind of what everyone else sees, or are you noticing something different? So I think it's interesting to think about, like, why was there this idea of norm? How narrow is that idea of normal and abnormal? And do we want to still hold to that idea, or do we have a more curious and creative idea of, the colorful kaleidoscope of human expression and human experience?
Mhm.
So, I think that test is valid, again, in a certain context with people who are very trained in it, but that's not going to be the majority of people who are practicing therapy or even psychology.
Yeah.